Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Greg, the single guy, and Matt, the family guy. We're recording episodes from around the globe to tell you about the best kept secret in education. That's right, it's teaching overseas. We're glad to have you.
Hey, welcome back to the International Teacher Podcast. I'm Kent the Cat Guy, and with me here is...
Greg, the family guy. No, wait. Oh, that's Matt, the family guy. I'm Greg, the single guy. And it's good to be back, Kent. I know we just got done interviewing somebody a couple days ago, but I enjoy being back online with you. And Matt needs to join us again, but he's busy with family. And right now he's traveling this weekend with school. That's one of those perks for school, right? Right, Ken?
Yes.
Hello? Without Matt to intervene, we have these pauses. But you know what, Kent? We have two excellent guests on our show. And the most exciting thing about these guests, I'll introduce in just a second, is that they, in December, without letting the cat out of the bag all the way, but in December, we're going to have another podcast that joins the podcast world, and it's going to be about international teaching like what we're doing, Kent. And these guys, they reached out to us, and we have to talk with them right now and find out more about what's coming up, because it's not out yet. It's on its way, being planned and all that. So Kent and everybody else, I want you to introduce you to David, who is coming to us from Boise, Idaho, and Audrey, who is coming to us from Kingston, Jamaica, man. Welcome to the show, you guys.
Welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you.
I'm Audrey Forgeron. I've been teaching overseas for over 30 years. You guys have talked about recruiting fairs, so I'll just mention I started off at the Queen's Fair, 1989, and went first to Ethiopia and stayed there for 2 years, met my husband there. Then we were recruiting, and our head of school said, "Where do you want to go? I'd like to write you letters of recommendation," which was awesome. So at the time there was no internet, so we just opened our ISS book and we're looking through. That's International School Services, if you don't know. We're looking through at the benefit package and what's going on at these different schools, trying to get an idea. And we kind of randomly picked some schools. And then the director said, "Well, what about Saudi Arabia?" And we were like, why would we go there? And he said, it's a great school in Riyadh. I know the head of school. They have awesome benefits, including daycare right at the school. And we were sold, we said, okay, we'll give it a shot. And that's where we ended up. And that's where both our kids were born. We have a son and a daughter. We ended up staying there for 10 years. The original plan was to go there for 2 or 3, but because the kids were little and we just loved the atmosphere there and how great it was for raising kids. So we stayed there for 10 years. Then off to Singapore, where we stayed for 9 years, so our kids got through school there. Except for our daughter, I should say. We went off to Chile after that because we said, hey, do you want to stay here for the last couple of years now that your older brother has graduated, or do you want to try something different? She said, oh, let's try something different. How about South America? So we said, okay, let's give it a shot. So we ended up in Santiago, Chile, and she graduated from there, went off to university, and then we stayed there for 3 years. And then, my husband was a little tired because the seasons are flip-flopped there. So he wanted to get back onto more of a North American type schedule. And we ended up in Senegal, in Dakar. And I stayed there for 3 years. And then I took a year off, to take a break, which was really fun. And my husband stayed 1 more year. So I then traveled around a bit with my kids, which was amazing. And then we moved to Rome in Italy, and we were there for a couple of years. It's hard to stay in Europe because it's expensive. So then we ended up moving to Jamaica, and it has been quite a ride. It's been amazing to just taste different cultures and parts of the world and experience all these different things and travel. And, I love this lifestyle so much that I want to share the joy. And that's where my co-host David comes in because, I thought I want to do a podcast. Who would be a great host? And David popped in my head right away because he had podcasting experience. I said, this will be awesome. And, I loved working with David back in the day. We met in Saudi Arabia. Here we go. Over to you, David.
Hey, thanks for that. And yes, that was Saudi Arabia was where we met. What a wonderful incredible school. I look back to the early 1990s, and we were doing project-based learning maybe before people were calling it there, and inquiry, and it was quite the school for our professional development, but it was a wonderful, wonderful community, and that really gets at why you might choose different schools where you are in your career. So like Audrey said, what a terrific place to raise children. And one of my sons was born there. And then the other one, we would move on to Panama, was born there. So Greg, I'm a little ahead of you in number of schools. So I've taught in 10 international schools. So I'm
Oh my God.
double digits. So I'm not going to run through all of them. I'll just share my start, much like Audrey, but I went to ISS in Boston, very well-known fair there in 1990, and ended up in Israel the year of the Gulf War. So that was quite an experience. And my roommate then, Brian, he and I played a lot of volleyball, rode our bikes all over the place, and we're part of a really terrific community there at the Walworth Barber American International School. A terrific start. And my career hasn't ended. I'm taking a pause right now. My last post was Vietnam at a fantastic school. And I've worn many hats, from social studies teacher, instructional technologist, curriculum developer, and counselor / wellness coach. So my big area of interest now is wellness, which has been a big focus with the pandemic. But for me, I was a supporter of wellness and the whole child from the get-go. And that's an area of focus, like I'm saying, for me going forward. So I'm really excited to be on your podcast. And like we were talking ahead of time, Jeff Udick and I started a podcast back in 2007. Some folks might have listened to it, Shifting Our Schools, SOS. And then I did the EdTech Co-op podcast with Mark Hofer, a real leader in TPAC research. He's a professor at the College of William and Mary. And now I get to work with my fabulous partner, Audrey, who's got so many different skills and just passion for reaching out with this new podcast, Educators Going Global, to really help guide people in what it means to be international educators. And we're aiming for the whole spectrum of the new folks coming in to the veterans towards maybe their end of their career and what they might be thinking about and pivoting maybe to that last school or back to their home country. So it's kind of covering the full spectrum of needs.
I think, David, what we should do is just talk about the schools that you haven't taught at yet. Would that be a shorter list? I mean, I won't even ask you how many countries you've traveled to. That's a popular question too, but wow. I mean, 10 different schools, and you guys are since the 90s. That
Yes.
is, I mean, for being 25 years old, you do a great job. I mean, that's fantastic. I have to give you a little, I have to nag you a little bit because I nag on people for that because I am 53 right now. I know I look 25, but I know some of the other people out there are the same. And we've been out for a long time, but I do look up to both of you for the experiences that you had back when there was no internet, when it was 1990s, and you guys were looking at the book, you said, of ISS, or when the search came out. There was also the Thai Online. If you remember that, the Thai Online, the Thai newspaper, was a quarterly newspaper that came out. It would be sitting in your superintendent's office maybe, and you had to actually subscribe to it. It wasn't online. It was a subscription thing that usually your school hopefully would be a part of. And you could actually see the newspaper articles about directors and movement and different schools around the world. I guess my point is I'm just amazed. Wow. And then we can go into the whole tech side of things, David, and talk about your experiences and podcasting. When Kent looks at me a year ago and says, "How do we podcast?" And I said, "I don't know." Right? We should have called you. We didn't know you.
Well, now, David, we have you on speed dial.
That's right.
David, I have a question for you. The world thinks that virtual teaching was invented in 2019 with SARS-CoV-2. You had the idea for virtual teaching way back in 2003 with the first SARS virus. What gave you the confidence and the idea to think we could educate people online?
I was in Hong Kong at Hong Kong International School. I was the instructional technologist for the upper school. A beautiful campus. If any of your listeners have ever been there or teach there, we were at the Repulse Bay location, and then there's the Titan down the road a bit, all on the opposite side of the island, away from the city center. So SARS came on very quickly. It germinated in the Kowloon side, so we were on the island side, and very sadly and very quickly, people were dying, and there was just a lot of fear in the air. The school rapidly started to decide what to do, and the response was, let's hunker down, let's let people get out if they want to. And it just dawned on me, one of the big things I've been trying to do was get all the teachers to have a web page. And back in those days, we didn't have the easy what you see, what you get software. I guess we did in some ways. We used Dreamweaver, which was a little bit of that way, but you had to have a little bit of coding. So we had everyone having web pages. And as a school, we were very far ahead, I think, of others technologically. We had great leadership in that area. But it just dawned on me. I walked into the principal's office and just said, we really don't have to shut down. In fact, our students and their parents, these families, they're going to need us, because they are going to close the doors to their apartments and their houses, and they're going to be having a lot of anxiety. And we can connect them, and we can continue the learning. And so the principal said, yeah, let's give it a go. And so we really divided and conquered. And in the end, I wrote an article about it, and I can share that with you to put into the show notes. So that's a quick synopsis of maybe the first virtual school, especially for elementary. There was the virtual school that had been out there for many years that provided courses for schools that just couldn't, let's say they wanted to do a language or upper level physics, that kids could take an online class through the virtual school. But we might have been the first actual brick and mortar school that went virtual.
We're in the presence of greatness. I mean, like you said, most people think that it started back in 2019. But in 2003, I was in Honduras on my third year of teaching. Audrey, where were you in 2003?
Singapore. That was our first year there.
And Kent, where were you? Seattle?
I was in Seattle, and I just was starting teaching school.
And washing cars. I see. Oh, that's awesome.
A young man.
Yeah. I think it's crazy to think that far back. And, in all fairness, we don't talk a lot about the COVID stuff because it's been over talked about in other podcasts.
Yeah.
We like to look forward. But it is so cool, and what a great question you had there, Kent, because to know that you were at the front lines of all of that. And David, you've also had a podcast since 2007, you said, right? And that is, I can't even imagine that. We've only been on air for a year now, and we only have 35, 37. This might be the 38th episode that we have, and we do it like every 2 weeks. And we're gonna keep getting better and better each time. Because Kent and I and Matt sit back and we say, hey, how can we make this better? How can we make it, more interesting for our listeners? But having people like you on our show, David and Audrey, is what really makes the show, besides our entertainment. But it gives a lot of feedback to other teachers that are trying to look into international teaching. For a moment here, I want to switch just a little bit here. We've heard from David. Was I just not listening? Audrey, what kind of teaching did you do, or you haven't done, I guess? You've probably done a lot of kinds of teaching. Can you tell us about your teaching history?
Sure. I didn't say because I felt like I was going on a long time, but I started off teaching French immersion, if you guys are familiar, where kids who are English speaking learn French through all their classes. And so I was living in Ottawa, Canada, yay, shout out, teaching social studies in French at a high school. And then I moved to Ethiopia. I taught French as a second language, or French language learning. Then I moved to Saudi, and I did physical education from grade 3 I ended up to grade 12 by the time I left there, because they added in Riyadh up to high school, but they added up to grade 12. And then when I went to Singapore, it was also health and PE. It was middle school, but I did also some technology classes because I took my master's in tech around that time. And then when I went to Chile, I went back to health and PE. But then my last year there, I became a technology, that guy, the computer support person, and loved it. But my husband wanted to move on. And then in Senegal, this was the crazy one. I taught film with no background in it, but I just worked really hard at it, and I think I did okay with it. But it was IB film, and those who aren't familiar with the International Baccalaureate program, it's pretty rigorous, and there's a lot of expectation. Kids are assessed externally, so I felt a lot of pressure personally. So I worked like a dog, but really enjoyed it. Film is just the greatest. Anybody who's taught it will tell you how much fun it is. And then from there, I sort of semi-retired and have been just kind of subbing. I've been enjoying the trailing spouse experience where my husband's been, recruiting and getting the teaching jobs, and I just come along for the ride, which is fabulous. And then I'm working on becoming a life coach, actually. And then I've been working on this podcast in my spare time with David. So it's been a heck of a ride, and I could start my own little school. I think along with David we could cover it all. So that's me.
Take me back. You and David, Audrey, crossed paths in Saudi Arabia in the 1990s. I'm kind of curious about how you started getting the idea that you want to do some outreach. You have this project called Educators Going Global. So walk us through kind of the origins of that idea, and then how you decided it was David you were going to reach out to, because you guys crossed paths so many years ago.
I have been for a while thinking, kind of when you stop teaching and you're just sort of thinking about, well, what would I like to do? And I've thought about doing a podcast for a while. And it just seemed like the clear choice would be to be, talking about international education, because I have lived it. I love it. I want to bring more people on to the team. And so when I started thinking about that, honestly, I was very anxious about doing it. And so I thought I need somebody who's got the experience and the knowledge. And I knew David had done some podcasting for quite a while, and I had listened to SOS, and I knew he was doing the other podcast, which I had not listened to. Sorry, Dave. And he was awesome to work with back in the day. I thought he would be a fantastic person to reach out to. And so I wrote to David, and I said, I want to do this kind of public service podcast for people that's about international teaching. And I wasn't familiar with yours at the time, so I thought this was all my own idea, and I didn't know that the International Teacher Podcast was already out there, or I might have been a little more intimidated. But as we've talked about, and I hope our audience would understand this too, this is like a collaboration. This isn't competition. This is, let's lift each other up. Let's we'll talk about yours on our podcast and vice versa. And I think it's just awesome, and it's such a great way to connect with more people, and part of my motivation, our tagline is travel, teach, connect. And so one of the joys of this whole international teaching experience is it's such a small community, and you meet people from all over the place. And I just love the idea that, if I went to travel now, I could reach out often on Facebook and say, who's in this area, and I would know someone. Or, if people say to me, oh, I'm going recruiting and I think I want to try to go to the school, like David mentioned is it
Walworth Barber, yeah.
Walworth Barber School. Well, I know the head of the school, it's just, I know people all over the place, and I love that about this experience. So that was my thinking, and reached out, and thank goodness he said he would, co-host with me, because I'll tell you what, otherwise I was like, I don't know if I'll do it. So thank you.
You could have been
David.
Stuck with Kent.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Now, David, did you answer that as quickly as Audrey said when she reached out to you? Was it, a yes automatically?
Definitely an easy yes. And it was an opportunity to kind of go the next step in podcasting, because my two previous ones with Jeff and Mark were really terrific. And we had a lot of followers, and we were doing a lot of outreach really about instruction. The three of us are involved in technology, but as you all probably know, the SAMR model and the TPAC model, we really lean towards pedagogy. So the shows were not so much about tech, but they were more about how we teach and helping people move beyond just regular instruction and into project-based inquiry and things like that. So it wasn't so much the technical side of what made those podcasts work. It was more the questions, the framework, the guest. So I was really, when Audrey offered this idea, I said, well, okay, this is going to be an opportunity to work with someone who's really smart and thoughtful and compassionate. And she's got a skill set. I've got a skill set. And like she said, we're real partners and we balance each other out. Yet for the two of us, we really are feeling that need to do a really good job with our website. We're going to be very web-centered with our show. That you listen to the podcast on your podcatcher on your phone, but then come to the website. That's going to be, well, it's being designed right now. We've got a team working with us, including Audrey's son, Kyle, and a quick shout out to Kyle for helping us with this. Yeah,
you're
big time.
awesome, bud. Thank you.
Yes, he is. Our plan is for folks to come in, and we're going to have a layout that's set up in tons of categories, from finance to recruiting to travel to curriculum, for folks wherever they are in their experience to come in and say, okay, I want to listen to that podcast on recruiting. I want to read a blog post about finance. I want to tell a going global story, or I want to listen to a going global story. So that's kind of what really pulled me in. And so far, we've been working on this several months. It's going really, really well. Just a quick sharing about the framework for our shows, where with Jeff and Mark, the three of us knew a lot about instructional technology, so we could share and riff off off our guests and things like that. But Audrey and I, it sounds kind of strange. We've been to all these schools, we've recruited, but neither of us feel like we really know a great deal about international schools, especially as they've changed so much in the last 10 years with the growth of especially for-profit schools, and then with the pandemic, and then with the lockdown in China, which has kind of turned the world upside down. That was for new folks going overseas. That was a huge area for international schools, and now it's not so sought after. So where are people going to be looking in the world now? And so that's where we reach out to these experts to tell us, what do they think? And then we have folks on like Greg, and he really offers a great insight into recruiting. So that's kind of the broad picture of what we're going to be doing in the podcast.
Yes, and www.amazon.com, finding the right fit, right, Ken?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Did Matt call you and say, let's rib on Greg? Oh my God. She's been listening to our other podcast, Kent.
I've been listening.
So then you'll let me know when you need a cat expert on your show.
Yes, absolutely.
You're going to have a pet category, because that is a very popular question.
Absolutely.
For people that are going overseas. It's going to be difficult to really rein that in, though, because every answer that we give to questions that people have about overseas, we always have to say, well, at some schools. That's difficult for all of us that are answering questions from out in the field. Is our experiences are solely our experiences, and they can learn from them, but you can't always give them the correct answer. They have to really reach out to the school and people that work currently at that school, because it's changed, like Dave said. These schools have changed over time. And I used to think, and you guys can chime in on this, I used to think that schools really stay the same, and even if they change their leadership, and this was a belief that I had before, okay? And that was early on in the years, and I was thinking, I'm going to do a website, and we're going to be like ISR. We're going to have a website, and we're going to call it something or other, and we're going to have people feed in there and give information, because the school the brick and mortar school stays the same. That was my idea back then. And since then, in my experience, I realized it has everything to do with the leadership. The superintendent, the director, the head of school, whatever you want to call that key person, and their team can really change a school.
Yeah, I've seen, the tone of schools change. Schools grow and shrink. We've been in places where, for example, in Riyadh, there was a bombing in Dhahran, and then, the military pulled out its mission. And so our school shrunk by almost half. And so everything changes. And I think as much as we love to believe that, we've left a legacy when we put in this or that program or, wrote this or that curriculum, after a few years, you can imagine that that's probably changed. So yeah, I think it's really not possible to talk about what a school is like unless you're in contact with someone who's there at the time, feet on the ground.
And I'll add in there with the Shifting Our School podcast and the EdTech, we were looking at the factors and really how to shift schools. And I'm going to use an old term, from learning 1.0 to learning 2.0. And that shift, number one factor, as you're pointing out, would be the leadership. If the leadership isn't working with you and on the ground in those meetings, you're not going to see those shifts take place. And then, as Audrey's points out, it really is incredible how schools kind of go through a cycle. Leadership leaves, new people come in, and if they haven't built their systems, think of the schools that you come in and you're ready to teach the curriculum and they don't have the curriculum, and you're just going, wait a minute, your school's been around for 40 years. And they go, well, we did have a curriculum. We tried to start a new one, but then the curriculum director left. The schools that are the best, I think, they've built those foundational systems. And when you come in, you're not going to find programs that are directed by individuals. That's another thing you want to watch for. Back in Saudi, we had a wonderful kind of specialist teacher, and he had some really great programs, but I knew when he left, they would disappear. They weren't built into the fabric and the culture of the schools.
Let's stick with this a little bit then. Would you both, even Kent, I guess I haven't asked you this either, but in an interview, think back in all the schools you've worked at and interviewed for, are those some of your interview questions, like how long have you been the director here, or maybe you go in knowing that, but you might ask a little bit about the director's style?
So for me, my number one question is, please give me examples of how you live your mission. I'm reading it on the website, and so many of the missions in international schools are about raising international, global citizens, raising or helping students grow with character, and that gets into wellness and positive psych that I really buy into. And I say, what does that look like? Tell me about a fourth grade classroom. How about a middle school classroom? If I were to talk to someone at your parent-teacher organization, how could they describe their experience with your mission? So I that's something I really believe in, being mission focused. We in fact have a mission statement for our podcast. So that's one big question that I ask folks. And then on the principal level, I say, tell me what your days are like. Where do you spend your time? And maybe some young educators are going, wow, that's too much to be asking that principal that question. Well, as Greg points out in his book, get ready for some tough questions they're going to ask you, and especially some questions that you would think they should not be allowed to ask. That's a whole different story, and I think you guys have covered that. But be ready with your questions after you go through the first, second, if you're in the third round of interviewing, and because this is where you're thinking about going to live and making a commitment to.
You have to check out them, and they're checking out you. So you want to know what kind of person you're going to work for. And it's a good point to also make sure that you've caught up to date on whether or not they're going to be the director that's there when you get there. Because listeners sometimes, and I'll let you answer that too, Audrey, about your pertinent questions for interviews for the director or for principals. But if for our listeners, you might run into a situation like I did for Switzerland, where I was interviewed by the current director, and I went on their website and found out that the new director was coming at the new year. So in August, I had a new director. So long story, I ended up finding out who that director was. And knowing about your director or principal, those are great questions, David. I'm glad you said that, because it's a two-way street interviewing. Audrey, how about you? And Kent, then maybe you can even think about an answer too.
Well, I was going to say you kind of caught me flat-footed with the question, because the last time I interviewed, I already knew the guy and had worked with him. So it was like, well, I kind of know what you're like and how you... But I was going to say that I think an important question too is, what is the culture at your school like? What's the community like? Where does the school kind of fit in with all of that? And, you can research for yourself what the turnover is like, but I think that that's really telling, particularly what's the admin turnover like, because that can be an indicator that a school is in flux, because without, consistent leadership, it's really hard to maintain a focus for the school, even if you have your mission statement and vision and all those things in place. So those are some things I would want to know about.
For me, I want to know that my director or my superintendent has a bit of a sense of humor. I'll joke around a little bit with them, and if I get something in return, I'm feeling really good about this. Audrey, you have a background in video, and so my question to you was, when you thought about how to kind of get the word out, did you consider video? Did you consider movies? Was there discussion in your mind which way you were going to go with it?
I did at one point think about doing maybe a YouTube channel type of situation, which we will have a YouTube channel. I'll just digress into that for a second. One of the things that we love about this whole international teaching lifestyle is the adventures that people have, being in another country, getting lost, maybe not speaking the language, police stories.
Police stories, yeah.
Border crossing, like it's all so fun and cool. And our thinking is that as soon as you start telling those stories, it jogs people's memory and they come up with, oh, I remember this other story. And there's so many cool, small world stories. Like it just goes on and on, all the stories. So that's what our YouTube channel is going to be. And Greg has already contributed. Thank you. A couple stories. We'll take more if you want. Kent, love it if you would do some. So that's going to be sort of our, video piece of the puzzle. But I am a podcast lover. Like when I'm running, I'm listening to podcasts. When I'm, going on an errand somewhere and walking, I'll listen to podcasts. When I'm doing the dishes, I got the podcast on. So it's such a deep part of my lifestyle that's where the podcast idea really came from. Also feel like personally with a vlog, there'd be so much more editing to be done. And, so I'm more comfortable with the whole audio only aspect.
Dave, it's funny. I keep trying to convince my co-host Greg here to go video, and he says, "Man, we have a face built for radio." Now, turning to David here for a second. Now, David, you're kind of a pioneer in podcasting. How has the podcasting world changed in your eyes?
Well, on the technical side, it's gone from 0 to 100, that there's so many choices in building your kind of technical foundation on how to do the work. Back in our day, Audacity was still there, and we used Skype, and I think we used a little plug-in to Skype that would actually record it. And then it was the case of using, like we do now, Audacity to edit, and then we would upload it to a server. But there was no, at least we didn't know about it, any tracking software. And like Audrey's kind of handling the technical side, and I've been reading up about it. And as you all have said on your podcast, you're able to see where your listeners are in the world, how much they're listening to each episode. There's so much data, and knowing if your word is getting out, if you're making a difference for people. So that's been the biggest change. But the thing that hasn't changed, and this is why Audrey and I are such lovers of podcasts, it's about storytelling. And just as the three of you, with Matt there are storytellers. And that's part of the story of what makes podcasts so wonderful. And we're going to, like we're saying, we're going to have our story time with Audrey and David on our episodes.
Everybody sit on the carpet.
That's right. We are, as we always say, we are teachers. So we will have our story time. But on the other aspect of the teaching is the informative side, that we're really going to have these structured shows with give and take. And when the guests come on and they share things that we can add to, we're going to add to them. And we're also going to have some shows where it's just Audrey and I talking about what we've learned, because this truly is a learning journey for us. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is reaching out and building community, which for your listeners is one of the greatest things about being an international educator. And we had an incredible community in Saudi where we lived on compounds together and played sports together. And so that's going to be a big aspect of our show is building community and crowdsourcing, asking people for input, shooting ideas out to them and saying, what do you think if we're going to cover this in a show? So that's one more aspect of what our podcast will be about.
Well, I tell you, I have to give you guys a little feedback on that and a warning to all listeners that choose to be on your show. If Audrey, if you agree to do the little stories on YouTube, Kent, and listeners, don't forget to look at the camera, because Audrey let me tell a whole story, like a 3-minute story, of course, with my details in there. It was probably like 15 minutes, but I'm telling this whole story, and at the end of it, she goes, Greg, next story, can we do this maybe again? Or your next story, can you look at the camera? And I'm like, oh my God, I totally forgot, because we're just sitting here on, we do podcasting and we don't worry about what we look like, or, I might be staring off in the distance or eating a piece of candy. But on YouTube, when you're doing your story, you have to look at the camera, Kent, okay? Make sure you do that. And I do want Kent to go on there and tell a few stories, because he's okay on he's like me, we have the face for podcasting, but he is a character. You guys know him already.
I just want him laughing on there. I just want to capture his laugh.
You can have it all you want, right? So here it's our podcast, so let's do this. We always love to hear stories. So I want to give David and Audrey a chance to tell a few stories. Kent, what do you think? We'll chime in if we can relate to it, but I think Audrey already...
Double bonus points. I think Audrey already said that she might have a police story.
Oh,
I know.
I do.
I can't wait. Go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Well, so first, just a super quick one. When we lived in Ethiopia, I got so many about Ethiopia, I just can't, don't try to stop me. But the police there were on foot. And so, we were told when we first arrived that if you're driving by, and we only had school vehicles, none of us could afford vehicles, long story, but anyway. So you drive the school vehicle, and there were two things they said, if you ever did actually manage to get pulled over, just, you wouldn't give your name, you would give the name of the school, and then nobody would claim that they were the one driving the vehicle at the time. And then the other story, the other story.
Kent was driving. Kent's driving, not me. Kent was driving.
But the police were on foot, and so they'd wave at you, and our predecessors, our buddies who were at the school said, just keep driving. They can't do anything about it because they've got no way to catch you and stop you. Just keep going. Just pretend you don't see them. So that was
Did they come
fun.
out, Audrey, can I relate to this? Did they come out into the street and try and block you from going around, like going through?
Not a lot. They just kind of sort of...
So they just sort of stood there and tried to politely wave you over?
Yeah,
because in Cambodia, the same thing happened. In Cambodia, I was on this little motorbike. Yeah. And what they started to do was when they saw me, at least, on a scooter, they wanted to stop me for some money for lunch or something. So what they would do is they'd pull out, and 5 of them would span out into like the 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Like I'd be at a light, right? And I turn right at the light, and all of a sudden I see there's 4 or 5 guys spanned out in the 2 or 3 lanes that I'm supposed to be in, and they're trying to wave me over. And this is after 2 years of this. At the end, before I was just like, screw you guys, and I'm flipping them the finger and going around them into oncoming traffic, because that's what you do in Cambodia anyway. And I would go around them, because they really had it, figured out that they wanted to pull you over, and they would make up something like your blinker, right? And my blinker worked fine, but they'd be like, nope, blinker broken, $5 US.
I mean, these guys don't make very much money, so I'm sure that, getting the baksheesh or whatever you want to call it is part of what they do to earn a living. So my other story was in Saudi, and don't do this at home. This is my, I guess, feminist leaning. I'm not very much what do you call it, fading violet, whatever those. Anyway, I don't sit around. And we were driving to school, and at the time you could park right in front of the school wall. And my husband, of course, was driving, because women weren't allowed to drive in Saudi. So we're driving, and he was indicating that he was going to pull into the school, or maybe he forgot to turn on his indicator, but he swears he had it on. And this person decided to pull around him to his left as he's trying to, turn left and park. He hit us, and I hopped out of the car. I was steaming mad. I was like, what were you thinking? We were signaling to pull in, and you don't pull around someone. And it turns out he was He hit us. He was a police officer, but you know what? I mama beared on him, because our son was in the car. He was in the back seat. He and I were in the back seat. And he's in his, he's less than a year old. He's in his little back-facing baby seat. And this guy and I was like, you could have, hurt our son. Da, 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 da. And realized, I yelled at him for 30 seconds or something, just visceral, blah, and then realized, oh my goodness, I'm a woman in Saudi Arabia. What am I doing? They don't take kindly to this kind of.
And that was in the 90s too, right?
Yeah, right. And so this guy, his first reaction was he just looked crestfallen, because he's like, oh my gosh, like your son, he felt terrible. And then you could just see his eyes glazing over, and he's like, wait a minute, no. And he's like, well, it's your fault. Basically, their feeling, we always joked among ourselves, their idea was that, well, you're in our country, so it's your fault kind of thing. And, he starts asking about insurance, etc. He never admitted fault, but I could see it in his eyes. But he wasn't going to admit it to a woman who shouldn't even know about driving. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's my.
Well, you gave him a piece of your mind, yeah. And it was, even though it was just emotion, right? And looking back on it, you're like, oh, that was pretty scary at some point that you did that.
Can you imagine? And they wouldn't have done anything to me, but they would have hauled my husband off. You can bet. Anyway.
Story time, David. Thank you for
right.
that one, Audrey. I love police stories. Does David have one?
Yes, I do. But you know what? I'm going to riff a little bit on the driving and share with your audience, and we'll probably have a lot of people nodding their head as they listen to this. So if you're new to being overseas and driving, one of the first things you're going to notice in many countries is they don't have a left turn lane. So we were in Morocco, same thing in Saudi, different places. And it was my first experience heading down the road. And there was this, looked like a big traffic jam ahead, kind of leaning left. And we're pulling up, and I go, what is going on here? And what I realized was they were simply turning left, no left lane. And so what happens is all the cars just kind of bunch up together, and then there's the oncoming traffic, and then someone has the courage to lean into that, and before you know it, as soon as they can get out, that whole swarm crosses over and gets their left turn in, and it just works in so much of traffic around the world. If you're not used to it and you look at it, you go, wow, I just don't know how it works, but somehow it does. And I'm looking at Greg, he knows. So let me share one other one. I was thinking of something a little different than the normal travel stories, the beaches and the going out to the snorkeling and all the wonderful places that you can go. And it's just the theme of sports. And so when I went to my first post there in Israel, I was an avid volleyball player, a beach player, doubles player from Virginia Beach, Virginia. So I had my net, I had my lines, and I had a volleyball. So I went down to the beach. Israel has beautiful beaches. And I got there, and the big thing in my mind would be, I'm going to need poles. How am I going to figure this out? And lo and behold, were two sets of blue metal poles. And I had a crew from school, and we played volleyball. And it was wonderful. And there, they used to have like tavernas on the beach. And I'd get to know the restaurateurs, and they said, they put those in years ago, and no one has ever used them. So one of the cool things about that is our crew, and Israelis started to come in. It became a community thing. We might have been the folks who started beach volleyball there in 1990 in Israel. So that was kind of a cool story. And it's something that I would carry on to my different schools in Aberdeen, Scotland, playing indoors, of course, 2 feet of snow outdoors. We would be inside playing doubles beach volleyball, wearing our bathing shorts and T-shirts, and then on to like Hong Kong, down at Repulse Bay and other places. And I know for Audrey and her husband, Mark, big time athletes playing sports. Mark's a big soccer player. So is Audrey. And that's a wonderful way that brings people together in these communities, is playing community sports.
Dave, in your opinion, what are the major world sports then? We're not talking about America. Let's talk 3 world sports. What are they?
Oh, yeah, I know that's a pointed question. So, of course, it's football, or as we say, soccer, right?
Yes.
And then in the Nordic region, that's all I could say is number 1 would be that. I really couldn't speak to a second or third, but I would say it would be football. What would you say?
I don't know. Audrey, what do you think?
Oh, definitely soccer number 1.
Soccer's number 1.
World.
Kent?
Yeah.
Oh, soccer, then I'd say cricket.
Yeah,
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Cricket is number 2 in my book, and I know that there's lots of places and lots of stories about American sports and how they've garnered a lot more audiences around the world with basketball, it's baseball and stuff, and there's different regions. But man, I tell you what, I've had to learn cricket, and I never knew how to play cricket. I had to watch a YouTube video or something like that, how to actually, how it's played.
Was the YouTube video 5 days long? Because
That's a really good point. I love that. Oh, man. Sports bring everybody together, though, David. You're right. And all of these schools that I have been to, I've been fortunate to go to, it didn't matter if they're small or large, they really had sports on the mind, and like other schools in the States, but they had a variety of sports that the kids would be in, and the PE coaches, the PE teachers, the FIAD teachers are amazing around the world. I think there's a lot of competition for great teachers in that respect. Yes. And I hold high respect for PE teachers because I see what they've done. And I don't know about you two and Kent, but I have definitely had to step in and be a coach at some of these schools because they want you to do extracurricular things after school. And they needed a soccer coach for 1st through 5th grade or something in Cambodia. And I was a soccer coach. I was a horrible coach, I think. But you have to step in and do extra things. That's a whole nother discussion. But sports bring us all together, right?
Right.
Yeah. My husband used to set up sports leagues. That would be his side thing. And he would bring in the other international schools, or in Saudi, he just got all the community kids together and set up a league for them. And
at our school, you wouldn't believe this, but our co-host, Matt, is the sports guy. He is involved in sports in the region, in the country, in the school, and he's been involved in sports all over the place. That's his bag. He really is a sports guy, and I'm sorry he's not here to be part of this conversation. When we come on to your podcast, the 3 of us, we will have to maybe revisit a little bit about Matt with his sports. It'll come through, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I will say that our listeners know that the ITP crowd is here in the desert somewhere, and we got World Cup coming in our area.
Yes.
So a number of people will be heading over and seeing and rooting for their favorite teams coming up in about 3 weeks, I'd say.
Yeah.
And where is that supposed to be?
Oh, it's going to be in Qatar. Qatar,
yeah. Qatar,
Yes.
Qatar. I don't know how to say it. I've been in the Middle East for a while. Everybody says it different ways.
It's Qatar.
I'd say Qatar in Arabic.
Yeah.
Quick connection to show how connected our world is. So Greg Mankata was a science teacher with Audrey and myself there in Riyadh. If you are to look at the main stadium there in the capital of Qatar, where I know they've got stadiums all over the country, this mammoth covered stadium because it's so hot, and right beside it, you can see construction of a smaller building. Well, that building is the new school where Greg Moncada's school, his students and faculty are going to move into. So if any of you are there in the capital city and you see a really cool looking building right beside the stadium, that is the new building for this school. And the school serves, it's a STEM school for students in Qatar. So they're local students, and I think it's supported by the Queen. So quick note on connections there.
You know what? If you put in the request early, maybe they'll let the school use the big cover when the stadium's done with it. Just a big giant cover over the school. It'll help the playground out, parking out. It'll be very lovely. So
use the stadium for PE. Never mind.
Oh my gosh.
well,
think big.
As we wind down, as we bring this home, when will your project be live? When can our listeners go to the website? When can they tune into the podcast? And where can they find you?
We are launching in early December we're hoping with all of it. So the website is www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. Then we also are going to have a Facebook page, Educators Going Global, and a YouTube channel, Educators Going Global. David, how about Instagram?
Yes. So I'm very active on Instagram as a photographer, and I'm going to be managing that and sending out information. In time, our blog, we're going to work out a way if people want to sign up to the RSS feed on that they can have it come to their inbox whenever we put new posts.
Yeah, kind of a newsletter type of situation. Yeah. And then, of course, we have good old email. You can write to us at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com. And by the way, David was talking about crowdsourcing. We would love any ideas, once we launch and you hear a couple of our episodes or go to our website, ideas on guests to invite, upcoming episode topic ideas, the whole gamut. And
yes.
We really will be active on our email.
We got an email from a man named Eric Massal, and he's got a master's of ed, and he was talking to us, and I'll just share a little briefly with it. It says, I just finished listening to ITP 33, where Lindsay leaves Budapest for Bangkok. It's the third or fourth episode I've listened to, and I just want to thank you for providing a window into a world I wish I had encountered 25 years ago. The reason I wanted to share a little bit of that email on our podcast is because we do read emails, and I know that Audrey and David, you're going to start getting emails like this too if you haven't already. You will have emails like this banked up, and we're going to have to make sure we do shout-outs for emails that are really they tell us that we're doing this for a reason. So having emails like this really makes us want to make more episodes and have more wonderful guests like the two of you on to our show.
Awesome.
In closing, Audrey and David, let's have your last thoughts.
Well, I just want to thank you for inviting us on, and I want to invite people out there to travel, teach, and connect with us.
All right. So I want to add to what Greg just said. Just that reminder that we are educators and how wonderful it is that every day we get to walk into classrooms, often with kids from all over the world, sometimes not, sometimes more local, but we get to teach in these terrific environments with so much support. And we get to learn and grow as these children teach us. And I'd like to share a thank you as well, gentlemen. So thank you for having us on. And we look forward to having you on our episodes going forward.
Kent, I don't know about you, Kent, but I feel like we're in the presence of a podcast that's going to shadow us, because even though we're all collectively reaching out, theirs is going to be so well planned and rehearsed, and it's going to be so much better than ours.
No,
think about the bragging rights, though. when we can say we knew them back then, that's going to be bragging rights.
And yours is so much fun, Like, I hope ours will be fun too, but ours is more on the informative side, a little more perhaps dry. I think you're going to keep just as much of an audience, so no worries
I'm
there.
joking about it. I love doing all of this. Kent has added so much. Matt, of course, is our other person that's really brings it to a close and to a I don't know. He's like the glue that keeps us together. So I love it. Kent, why don't you bring us to an end of this podcast?
And thanks to our guests, David and Audrey from Educators Going Global. This is Kent and Greg saying, until next time, class.